order, 9:01, Saturday, April 20th. Thanks everyone for being here today, those joining us in the audience. We've got an agenda, and the first thing that we have is to discuss our district mission statements, doing goals, with an idea then of starting to think about how we might want to recast a vision statement, how we might want to recast a mission statement. This came out of a variety of conversations with had input from community members around innovation in the community, innovation in the school district, making sure we've got goals established there. I think we as a board have looked at more of our mission statement and the belief statement before and thought perhaps if they've been with us for a long time that maybe it's due for a refresh. And so the time we've allotted today on this one is just to start talking about what that vision statement might look like and what a revised vision statement might look like. I'm not anticipating that we're actually going to walk out of the discussion today with well-crafted vision and mission statements, but if we can agree that this is the direction that we want to go with the vision and mission and start articulating some of the concepts that we'd like to see represented in both of those, then I think we can take that input and craft some drafts and bring them back for review at a later session. So the current mission statement and belief statements are listed there, and then Steve provided, I thought, a helpful document kind of trying to articulate the difference between vision and mission, and then a whole bunch of examples ranging from sort of corporate entities as well as districts in the country, and I thought that was pretty helpful actually to differentiate between vision and mission, where vision is really that aspirational statement, mission is more about how we're going to accomplish that from a strategic standpoint. So with that, maybe just do you have any comments?
Yeah. One of the things that we meet, I think you know, we meet every other week with union leadership, and so I went through the retreat agenda with them just so that they were up to speed on where things are at, and we talked about the vision and mission issue, and they are, as an association, would be very interested in participating in the process and sharing some thoughts. We talked about how we might be able to use some of our data gathering tools to reach out into our stakeholder groups, whether that's our students, our staff, out into our parent community, do some kind of key concept, keyword gathering from them to understand what types of things they think about when they think about where we're going and then how we're going to get there. So they're very interested in participating in that process. I shared the deck with them, and I always use the analogy that it's like going on a car trip with kids. The kids want to know where we're going, and then they also want to know where are all the stops along the way, and so that's the kind of the difference between the vision and the mission. You'll notice on ours, at least since I've been with the district, there's not been a vision statement, and I know in this kind of multidisciplinary group that we've been working with that includes the chamber and ICAD and ICR and the university, that's a question that they've been asking the district, is from a vision standpoint, what kinds of things do we see in our long-term future, and how we articulate that. So they have some interest in sharing some input on that, some thoughts that they have. So I think that at least from that standpoint, I think that there's a lot of folks out there that are interested in stepping up. Visioning and missioning processes are always kind of a convoluted affair, and not always something that people look forward to doing. But I've got a lot of interest, both from internal and external stakeholders that would like to participate in it. So I think that I think it's a good time to start having that conversation.
So what kind of process then would you anticipate? I mean, you sort of were talking about getting the key concept word collection.
Yeah, we were brainstorming about how we might be able to reach out to various constituency bases and just have them start sharing their input and their thoughts about it. And then some of the tools that we have, we can do some word frequency things in there. So what kind of concepts are coming up on a regular basis. We talked about whether or not there's some specific kinds of questions that we can ask students that could help elicit some of those ideas, and then bring that information back to you as a board.
could you do it online?
Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about being able to do.
Tools to kind of do the
Yep,
OneCloud
I mean,
stuff
even
and see.
where you can just, type stuff in on your phone, we're not asking for people to write books, so it's a relatively straightforward process. We talked about maybe doing some focus groups with kids through student senate, student council, all the way down into the elementary level, and asking them a similar set of questions that then we could get input from all school sites. So the association's really interested in participating in the process, which I think is great.
What do folks think? I mean, I actually really like the idea of getting that sort of broad input from community teachers, students, because it's one thing for us to sit in a room and kind of make it up. We are trying to represent, right? But on the other hand, getting that direct input, and then we can take that input and do sort of the wordsmithing activity, and then bring out the
Yeah.
examples for a comment, and
It might delimit our
It takes the
field a little
buy-in, I
bit.
think.
Yeah, so rather than just starting with a complete blank canvas, at least then we've got some
Yeah.
ideas about where the interest level lies and the things that they're thinking about from a future orientation standpoint.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, just kind of general thoughts is, and maybe it's the lack of the vision that's on here, but even looking at the belief statements, there's very little there in terms of like the environment, right? It's all about the kind of the learning. There's not a whole lot about a welcoming environment, and there's the very last one that talks about being safe, but there's not a lot there about just kind of the culture and that kind of stuff. And I think that either belongs in a vision or in belief statements, and I think it's about making obviously the destination place, right? If we're successful, right, we're going to be able to measure that in a net gain of students instead of a net loss of students every year. And I think that isn't solely based on how well we're teaching them, because I think we're doing a pretty good job there. But I think stuff around the culture and environment in the schools needs to be teased out somewhere.
Maybe one thing to keep in mind is it's not on here because we don't know exactly, but these 2 pages of documents are at least 15 years old.
Yeah, it's time for a
Yeah.
refresh.
So the mission, the belief statements, and then those student learning goals, that information is all from somewhere between 2000 and 2004. We're not exactly sure where. So,
That's helpful to
Yeah.
understand that, because I was thinking that this is a worthy endeavor, and we're doing a lot of worthy endeavors right now.
Mhm.
We're, about to open 2 new schools, we've just changed boundaries, we are doing budget cuts, we're doing a lot of really important things, and I'm just, like, how much can we do? And we have other things that are on our list that we haven't even touched, which I won't list, because it's so long.
Yeah, listen to
Kind of the agenda today.
all these things,
I
yeah.
agree with Lori, and just to tag on to that it's not just the mission or vision statement of the folks right now in this room.
Mhm.
It really should reflect our community, which includes our staff, our students, because we wouldn't be here without them, as well as community partners. So I think we have to make it so people can feel as though it's a mission statement and a vision statement that we all can get behind and we're working towards to exemplify. So totally agree, especially with the first part of that, but just wanted to add on to that.
It seems more and more, whether it's University of Iowa or community groups, I'm thinking like recently Eaglert and Film
Mhm,
Scene
yeah.
are trying to do some arts in the schools, kind of but partnering with the schools, and they've got, they're
Mhm.
sort of in a sense, we're sort of, it almost feels whether right or wrong, we're this hub of a spoke of everything going on in the community. I mean, businesses look to us for great education, so they can recruit talent. And I mean, it's just every dimension of our community looks to the schools to fulfill something for them or on behalf of them, or, do you know what I mean? And so getting that broader community input, to your point, Lucy, I think is super important, but I do resonate, we got a lot on our plates. So that's why kind of this idea of maybe some initial collection of information, if we can do it electronically and not make it a heavy lift initially, But then we can somehow chew on it maybe once we get back in the fall. I mean, honestly, summer people are in and out, it's not as much time as we typically have, but I don't know, I'm from a process standpoint, I'm torn. And I do think it's actually really important for us to have a refreshed vision, mission with all that stakeholder input, because some of the things that are on our list to work on, whether it's the next round of our facilities activity, whether it's, CTE or pushing more agendas on that community-based pre-apprenticeship types of things. I mean, that vision needs to, I think, be articulated to help us continue to stay focused on those things. I mean, that's what a good vision statement and
Right.
a mission statement will do. It helps you focus and then determine priorities based on that. So I feel kind of a sense of urgency, but I'm also mindful that we just got a bunch on our plate and trying to balance those things.
So, just so you know, so we had a conversation about this in the admin team, and one of the things that we think we can do is that we can reach out both in person and electronically and gather input from a lot of people. We actually had the conversation you just mentioned about, is this best done in May or is this best done in September? And it may work more effectively to do it in September, just because of the kind of the time pressure here at the end of the year. Gather enough information that hopefully what we can bring back to you are some themes, and they might be different. The themes we get from kids might be different than the themes we get from adults. The themes from staff might be different than the themes from the community, but be able to pull some of that in so that collectively as a board you're able to look at that and distill some of that, and then in the end make some prioritized decisions. Obviously we can't have everything. You kind of see it from our mission statement right now. I think they tried to include everything in there. You reflect that with some of the ones that I was able to pull together that are maybe a little bit tighter, a little bit more focused, to use your word. But that might give us that opportunity to better understand some of the input that we're getting from the various groups within our community. And then that would help us as we go about setting that how piece, the mission piece, and putting some priority to those many, many things that are on our list of things to do.
Well, our community, our schools are our community, and that's why Hills gives us $20,000. It's because it's that important to them. And I think our discussions should not only be electronic, but they should be public. And there should be a rigorous public discussion, and it should be open. And a vision doesn't come to life unless the leaders model it. And that's incumbent upon us that anything we create, we follow through on, and we are totally committed to making happen. Because then it rings hollow. Because I don't know how many times we've had people come to the podium and recite to us what our mission statement is with something that we didn't really follow through on.
Which raises a good point that in terms of having a robust conversation, I just want to say I'm not opposed to this exercise. Please don't misunderstand me. I do want to be sensitive that we are asking our staff to make a lot of changes in September. We've got a lot of students moving around, a lot of staff moving around. I don't want them to feel like, oh, they're going to take on this process when we're otherwise occupied. So I just want to be sensitive to that. A lot of flux in our community right now.
Sure, and I think I can work through the association in particular to better understand timing. So certainly bring that up with them in our next conversation, and I think they can probably give us a pretty good sense of what's a appropriate time to reach out to staff.
For them to maybe tell us what works for them, instead of us saying, we're going to do this process at this time. You tell us, when's a good time that you guys can participate in this
Sure.
fully and feel like Phil said, that it's not all electronic, people sitting at their computers, but a conversation instead.
That's good. So you'll reach out to the
Yep.
organization and some input on timing. Anything else on this topic?
I was just say we could look a little bit at during curriculum review, that's kind of the first thing they do at their meetings is looking at, because each group has their own mission and vision. And, you know, they got a room full of people all having a conversation about it. And some of it gets a little into the wordsmithing, but I think a lot of it is just people throwing out generic themes that they want to see in there. And then kind of leave it to a couple people to wordsmith it in the end. But that's a kind of a nice format, is to have all the people that are the stakeholder in that regard. You know, when we just did the language arts curriculum one, and there's, I don't know, 30, 40
Yeah.
people in that room. You know, all of them but me, experts in it. You know, hashing it out. And I think that was kind of a neat way to see them do that. And the library curriculum did the same thing. So, model after it.
That's good. Okay.
All right.
You'll get back to us.
I will. I'll get.
Next up is the school calendar alternatives. I think, Steve, this is from
Yeah, I'm gonna
information gathered we went through.
I'm going to pull up the first one, which is that religious considerations document here. So one of the things that came up last year was a need to better understand how our calendar was working for various groups in the community and how it aligned with some of the concerns that were being raised about where we had calendar conflicts with various religious observances. And so I sat down with a leadership group from the mosque. I met with the rabbi and some folks out at the temple, and then met with several members of the Christian community to better understand where their concerns were in regard to our calendar. And I'll just walk through that. I won't read everything here to you, but just share some thoughts with you. So one of the things that, so I'll start with religious Sabbath. And you may not be aware of this, but in the Middle East, most countries run school Sunday to Thursday. And the reason that they do that is because Friday is the Sabbath day. And so they don't have school on Friday because that's a religious observance day for them. So in talking to folks from the mosque, one of the concerns that they have is obviously school and work occur on Friday, and so for many of their faithful, it's difficult to attend service because either their kids are in school or they're working. They understand that, they're working around it. They would really love to have and they talked to me about this in terms of working with employers in the community, about getting extended lunch hours on Friday. They brought up the idea of could early release happen on Friday instead of Thursday, because even getting out an hour early, because they flexed some of their services to occur after the end of the school and the workday, and that would be helpful. They shared with me that Cedar Rapids had moved some of their early out time to Friday afternoon, and that had helped them. Met with, again, I said I met with the rabbi and some folks at the temple, and one of the things that they wanted to make sure that we conveyed was the understanding that the Jewish day starts at sunset, and that's every day as they measure it. And so then from a Sabbath standpoint, that their Sabbath actually starts on Friday at sunset. So last night, not an issue. If you were outside, the sun was out late. But as she said, January and February, that Sabbath day can begin almost as soon as the school day ends. And so that can be a challenge. She was very open to the fact that there's quite a continuum of level of observance. And she said really observant families struggle when that Sabbath day is so close to the end of the school day. But obviously as a faith group, they've worked around that. Obviously with our the Christian denominations, Sunday is the Sabbath day there, although they said there's lots of things that occur in churches on Friday and Saturday. And then looked at holy days, and so we went through their calendar. I've included some of the highlights on here. And this is more so for anything else, just a better understanding for all of us about when various days fall. The rabbi did, she's got a great sense of humor, and she said if we actually elected to follow their calendar, that even if we went to school year-round, we probably wouldn't have enough school days to meet the state requirement. So she said there's a lot of days on there, and she tried to distinguish between major holidays, most observed holidays, and minor holidays. And I actually have her whole calendar if you're ever interested in seeing that. And then the pastors and the priests that I talked to made sure that we had the high holy days for Christianity on there also. We also talked about prayer in school, because we had a pretty wide-ranging discussion at all of them. And one of the things that we talked about with the community from the mosque was about making sure that for the religious, the kids that are very religiously observant, that we consider whether there's some opportunity to create some space for prayer. We had a good conversation about the idea of religion in school and how we can accommodate for that. They were very expressive about our schools that have created spaces for kids so that they feel comfortable and safe leaving class, going and taking care of their prayer responsibilities and then getting back to class. So they were very appreciative of that. The rabbi didn't have a lot to say about that. It was interesting, I didn't put this piece in here, but one of our Christian religious leaders wanted to make sure that we were aware that prayer is happening often in silent, beginning and end of the school day, and also during test time. I didn't put that part in here. That they didn't necessarily need a specific space for it, but certainly appreciated that people were aware that that was taking place. Talked a little bit about religious practices, and in some places in schools, our young women feel very comfortable wearing their head coverings. In other places they haven't been. They said that that's been kind of an evolutionary process, that they felt more comfortable more recently, that as recently as even 3-4 years ago it was a bit more of a struggle. They're feeling much more inclusion now, but they thought that actually having the opportunity to speak more directly with staff about it and help staff understand the role of various head coverings would help the young women feel more comfortable universally in the schools. The rabbi talked about dietary restrictions during Passover in particular, and said that most of their families get around that during Passover by bringing their lunches to school, just so that they don't have to worry about whether or not there are any mistakes that the kids might make. They said the older the kids are, the easier it is for them to figure it out. So they said the high school kids usually could, if that's the case, can eat in the a la carte line because they have enough knowledge to make sure that they're eating the appropriate food. But with the younger kids, they tend to just send their food during Passover. She didn't say that she necessarily expected us to make any changes. That was just really something that she wanted us to be aware of. She said most families don't have an issue during the week of Passover, just making sure that their kids bring the right food from home with them. We had a great conversation with a group from the mosque about Dearborn, Michigan. If you don't know Dearborn, Michigan, it's got the largest population of Iraqis outside of Iraq. The community is majority Muslim. And because of that, obviously, they've made some significant changes in their schools to accommodate the majority of kids. And one of their suggestions was, as we move forward, if there are things that we are interested in doing, that perhaps we can make some contact with the Dearborn Public Schools and have some conversations with them about changes that they've made that have worked, or challenges that they've experienced, and things we might learn from them. In general, as I talked through with the groups, they just had some issues that they wanted to bring up that are things that have come to them from their congregants. So some issues with computer access and computer illiteracy. In particular, the group that I met with from the mosque said that they have obviously a lot of folks that are coming from overseas and may not have a technology background when they arrive here. And that perhaps there's a way for us to work with the mosque to help them as their congregants develop their technology literacy skills. Slide back over here. So that next one is language issues. And this was one that came up in general, but just a question about how many languages we interpret for. We had a long conversation about the 90-plus languages that are spoken in the district, and sometimes the difficulty that we have finding finding interpreters. They talked about the potential to partner with us to help find volunteer interpreters, especially for some of our harder to locate languages where we might have a smaller population of students and parents. And then we talked about making sure that we're translating materials in the 5 most frequently spoken languages besides English in the district. So that's just a quick summary. I'm happy to answer more questions. It was a great set of meetings with those folks that gave us a lot of food for thought as we went in to the next 2 topics, which was talking about our professional development calendar, which we've had long conversations with our association about, and then how that might interface with some of our ability to better meet our students and our families' needs. So before I go into that, do you have questions about this?
Well, one thing I want to bring up is that, it's kind of ironic we're meeting on Holy Saturday. I know when, and I don't like the loopholes. It's just my own technological indifference. But I did express that I would come to any day that we did this, but I did not want to do it on Holy Saturday. In my faith, this is very important. We had Good Friday yesterday, which I know any student that wishes to can observe that, and they're not penalized.
Right.
I mean, and I think that that's important, that we allow the freedom for anyone, no matter what religious or belief. And we didn't bring up people that practice Buddhism, and I got talking with Father Steve about that, and he was saying, well, that's not a religion, that's a belief. It's like, okay, so then that was another hour. So it's important that whatever religious or beliefs a student has, that they're able to follow those and observe those. But I think a work session on a very significant holiday doesn't set a good example that we're talking about it for others. But that being said, also on your holy days of obligation, in the Catholic faith, it depends on if it falls on a Friday or a Monday, because they essentially would want you to observe it on the Mass on Sunday. So there's some exceptions on that. And of course, there's dietary restrictions for Catholics. We're ending Lent, so Fridays have been a difference. There's also fasting on certain instances, and I know every time that there's a Jewish athlete and there's a college football game during fasting. Escapes me exactly which holiday it is, but they'll bring the significance to the fact that they hadn't eaten since the day before. So there are challenges with all of this, but we have to also be very cognizant of the fact that we're not giving preference to one over another. And I had Kim research when we stopped observing Christmas as Christmas, and it appears it was in, was it 74? Yeah.
73, I think.
73, 74 year was when we went to winter recess. And I guess it's interesting they refer to it as recess, not break. But from Christmas and Easter recess. And of course now, spring break this year didn't even fall on Easter. So I think it's important that we're careful that we don't, in what we're doing, de facto give greater significance to one over another. But I think it's also important that no student be academically penalized for practicing or pursuing their faith or belief.
What do we do in terms of students who want to miss a day of school or leave school to,
Those are excused absences.
Yeah.
Yep. Parents just need to let us know if the student's going to leave early or is going to miss school for the day. So those are all excused absences.
So do we want to transition into the PD proposals? I do know there is a.
There's a nexus, yeah. So maybe, yeah.
Before we jump to that, just because you brought it up, so I looked at it. When you're talking about the Dearborn School, so I kind of just went through and looked at their calendar. And, I mean, they are pretty specific on their days off. And
They are.
Holiday and why
They
they're
are.
taking it off. And actually have a lot of days off.
They do.
So what was I don't know if you researched it,
Their comment actually about Dearborn was less about their calendar than about their accommodations. And so we had a great discussion about it because essentially what they said is, hey, they were pretty explicit about, you know, our societal calendar is built around an understanding that the Christian Sabbath day is Sunday, and so that's the way our calendar has been built historically. And that's when we had the conversation about in the Middle East, their week is Sunday through Thursday instead of Monday through Friday, and they said we recognize that, we understand that. We think that there are that you can, in a viewpoint neutral manner, make accommodations within the general public sphere for lots of students. And one of the things that they pointed to was Dearborn has figured out how to exist inside the public school system in Michigan and follow all the rules and regs that the state has, but yet has made some pretty significant accommodations. And so it was more of a general conversation about looking to them for how they accommodate their minority religious population, and how we might look to them perhaps for some opportunities to do that kind of accommodation here.
Because it is tough, I mean, you know, taking time off for religious practice, you're getting out of the normal sequence of your group and your classes, and so you're having to make up the work.
Yeah.
So those accommodations do
Well,
become
and,
important, right, to be able to support
Yeah.
students and families as they, you know, are
And-
trying to make up the time.
and to Phil's point, you know, you want to make sure that students aren't penalized
Right.
through their observance. And
Right.
I'll just give you an example. We've struggled with this in recent years, but we used to always try to schedule the City West football game in the fall so that it would fall on the Jewish Holy Week, because then we could agree to hold the game on Thursday night. When we were competing with other members of the conference, the game was on Friday, and unless they agreed to move the game, then it had to be played on Friday, and most of those communities were unwilling to move the game. So the only way that we would have control of the game was if we controlled both of the teams that were playing the game, and so we often played that boot game on Thursday night, and it was specifically to try to accommodate students that otherwise wouldn't be able to play in the game because it was after sundown, and therefore their holiday had already started, their holy day had already started, and so we needed they wouldn't be able to play. So we've tried to do that in the past in terms of both meeting our secular needs and accommodating for their holy needs. So from a professional development standpoint, I think many of you may remember, if not, we do our annual survey where we ask our staff about the culture and climate in the district. The one item that has traditionally struggled to make it above the 60% threshold for very satisfied or satisfied is our professional development. And much of that centers on our Thursday early outs. And there's a lot of frustration with staff with it because you have two choices really with Thursday early out. You can do the professional development in your school, in which case you have access to the entire time between the end of the student day and the end of the work day to work together collaboratively. Or if you're trying to meet with all the social studies teachers or all the third grade teachers, you have to go somewhere. And if you're coming from Penn or you're coming from Hills, depending on where you're meeting, you can lose a significant portion of your time in travel, which then severely limits their ability to collaborate. Or with our schedule the way it is right now, It's actually really difficult to get a K-12 art meeting, for instance, because from the end of the school day and the end of the contract day for the elementary teachers, and then the end of the school day and the end of the contract day for the secondary teachers, the overlap window is really narrow, so the art coordinator can bring them together and has this amount of time, but the elementary teachers are here and the secondary teachers are here, and so their intersection period is relatively minimal. And so for the last couple of years, that's been a pain point for our K-12 curricular areas. And so we've been engaging with the association in some conversation about what we could perhaps do to look at some alternative deliveries for professional development that might be more effective. And about 2 years ago, we started talking about moving from the early outs to half days. And we talked about where those might fit in the calendar. Are those best done midweek, mornings, afternoons? And then it intersected with this conversation that we had with our religious communities because this issue of Friday afternoon came up. They steered us to Cedar Rapids. We had some conversations with them. And the association went out through their rep council and through their membership, had some conversations about the half-day issue, when and where it might fall on a week, and what impact that might have on their professional development opportunities. And so we put two calendars together. The full-day release one we had talked about as an option also. But in the end, the association membership, their feedback is that they have the greatest level of support for considering a half-day release. And
Full day versus half day.
Obviously, if you can, we do a full day in October right now. That's the day we're moving to November. It's going to be on election day moving forward, and that's our staff development day that gets the greatest satisfaction ratings from the staff. It's staff-led. So what we essentially do is we put out a call for presentations. Staff members pitch us presentations. There's a committee that goes through and selects those. Staff members present. Other staff members then get a chance to go through and pick the sections that they would like to go to from a professional development standpoint. So it's peer-to-peer. It's really been well received the last few years. And so obviously if you went to a full day, you'd have more opportunity to do those kinds of things just because you have the flexibility of an entire day to work with. There was the association, as they came back, one of the things that's a bit of a struggle with that is they're much more spread out through the year, so you lose some of that continuity. And so part of the discussion about the half days was you still maintain some regularity of contact. You're every few weeks instead of a month and a half between them, so there's more regularity of contact. And yet now there's still that ability with a half day to have significant connection, whether you're looking across grade levels or vertically across curriculum areas, to do some hopefully better focused professional development that's not quite so disjointed because you're eating it in such small bites.
But from an academic standpoint, tell me how in a half day at the secondary level that's going to be beneficial to the students.
So one of the things that we talked about there, and actually at the elementary level too, because one of the concerns that came up was if you do all afternoons, then if you're an elementary kid and you have art on Friday afternoon, do you now miss 10 days of art? So one of the conversations was that essentially we could develop half-day schedules. And so on the weeks that you have those half days, 5 of them would be full mornings and 5 of them would be full afternoons, so that you would have that regular schedule, so you wouldn't have a compressed schedule, you wouldn't have these tiny skinny little periods, but you'd have regular full periods in there, and then those would be kind of on an every other Friday as you go through that professional development schedule, so that you would have that opportunity to have the full academic contact time during that day. So that was one suggestion that was brought forward.
Well, my concern would be that at the secondary level, or the same way, that we see with adding the 10 minutes to the day to get our snow days caught up, what's that, when you break that, when you add 10 minutes to secondary day, and there's 7 periods, that's a minute 30 or whatever to each course. Okay, what was the one thing that we plugged in and did? So That's my concern, is that even though, the full day to me seems a better fit, even though I understand there are fewer of them throughout the year and that, but you have an opportunity to get everybody in,
Yep.
lock in on
Dive
that.
deep.
Exactly, and maximize that opportunity, because even with the half day, you're still gonna hear
There's a
concerns.
transition.
You're still gonna hear concerns from
Yep.
the ones down in Hills, if they gotta go up
Yep.
to Liberty,
Yep.
or what it is.
Yep.
Transportation, and we know transportation is a barrier to education. How we see that it is also a barrier to professional development.
Yep.
And, utilizing the technology we have too, with inter-building communications and things like that, where we don't have to transport the people.
That's one of the things that they're trying to do to mediate the Thursday issue right now, is
Sure.
they'll do Zoom meetings and things like that.
Right, I think that's been the most constant thing from staff that I've heard in my participation is that getting to them and addressing things in the classroom and running to that. Like I say, I would also push a little bit
Yep.
just towards.
And you raise a great point, because there's still that transition issue, and you're going to get that on those 10 half-days, because you're going to have, instead of the transition being going to at the beginning of the day, it's going to be going to in the middle of the day, and so you're going to have some kind of transition aspect in there. One of the things that the association shared is that, where your lunch fits in there can help accommodate some of that. And they had I will tell you that they had a pretty robust discussion about that inside the association on the full or the half days, and they raised many of the points that you just did as part of that conversation.
Now, and so the election day, full day
Mhm.
development, now that I think that's a great move, and it'll give us
Yeah.
still the ability to utilize our buildings
Right.
for polling places without the continued concerns from the public that
Exactly.
it poses a risk. But I think that a strong look should be looked at the full day development that way, and also maximizing the technology that we have to cut down on those things.
I think I'm in agreement with some of what Phil says too, and I also think about families and what's going to be best for our community. A half day, having to make those arrangements, daycare, or childcare, or pick up, or whatever, versus a full day. But then I also think of full days, some of those kids that really rely on some of the services that are provided at school, lunches, breakfasts, and things, that they're going to miss out on that for that day too. So, I mean, there's pluses and minuses on both sides. So I'd be interested in full conversation with both sides.
One thing I will share on the pluses and minuses thing is I think the association would agree with you on both of that. The one thing that they did say was that the pluses and minuses for either one of these calendars outweigh, in their perception, the Thursday early out. So either one of these two is preferred to an early out, was the feedback that we got from them.
So what are the next steps then?
We wanted to bring it to you with the idea that, we'd had the conversation with the religious community, so you understood the impact there. But we also, because I was actually going to bring that to you as a separate issue, but then the PD one came up with it. It really came out of our conversations. Last May, again, we saw PD was about 60%. We went back to the association and said, really help us understand. We've been working really hard to try to improve the days at the beginning of the year. We've worked really hard, especially that October day, to get that up to speed. Where's the hang up in it? And they went out and talked to their membership and came back and said the hang up is Thursday. We said, all right, let's talk about some alternatives with that. And so what we really want to do is to bring to you the half and the full day options that we've now fully vetted. We've gone through both looking at our state requirements for it. We've had the conversation with the association. And just pose to you that these are two potential alternatives for us to think about, and really look to you for direction in terms of, do you want us to stay with Thursday early outs? Would you prefer that we move in one of these two directions? And if so, which one you would prefer that we move in? If you remember, we have a calendar setting committee. They helped with these two drafts that you have here. But then our responsibility would be, if there's a direction that you would like us to go, we would go back to that calendar setting committee with those parameters, and then they would look through these drafts, make any changes that they would see to it, and then when we go through our regular calendar setting process and come back to you now in November instead of September with new calendars to look at, that they would actually have the next 3 subsequent years beyond drafted for you to look at for consideration.
Would we be looking at the 2020, 2021 year?
We could, that would be the earliest we would look
But
at.
that would be tight if we're not voting on it till November of 2019.
And-
You know what I mean? That's
Right,
pretty
in
late
terms of
to
giving
affect
giving
that
parents
next
notice
year.
and things like that, yeah.
So realistically, from a time standpoint, we're probably looking at implementing it.
I'd say no earlier than the 20-year, and then we would look to you for guidance on what's a good implementation timeline for that, if that's a direction you want to go.
How long have we been doing early outs on Thursday? As
Forever.
long as I can remember.
Yeah.
I've been in school, that's been a long time.
As I know, not that we want to work our schedule around it, but a lot of people have, other groups have worked their schedule around
Mhm.
that. So
Yep.
a lot of events happen on Thursdays because they can start them a little bit earlier if staff or students need to get to them.
Yep.
So that's a consideration. I guess I would, if I'm looking at whole day or half day on a Friday, I'd probably lean towards myself the whole day for some of the same reasons that Paul and Phil said. I think that having weird schedules every now and then it's disruptive. I think you'd get better PD if it was a more full day. I know Friday afternoon I'd check out, and if Friday afternoons we're going to target everybody to do something,
Yeah.
that's a little hard.
I'll just share this with you because it's of interest and it comes up with that. So we had that conversation with the association, and Brady was pretty emphatic about it, that we have a very professional staff, and whether they have kids or whether they're doing professional development, the expectation is they work from the starting line to the finish line. He had that direct conversation with their team about, are you worried about focus and persistence and doing that on Friday afternoon? And he came back and said no. He said they had a pretty robust conversation about it and said, if you give us a half day, whenever you give us a half day, we would use that half day, and we're not worried about Friday afternoon. So
That's a fair argument. I still think having adjusted schedules is
Yeah.
a weird thing. I
Yep.
think for a family to once a month figure out a day that they have to do something versus multiple times a month figuring out half-day things, which I think is more difficult to find in the community things for childcare. So I guess I'd still lean towards the
we even
full day.
tried when we were putting the draft together to say, well, could it be every third Thursday? Could it be every, so it was at least a regular, we couldn't figure out how to make that work. So, because you wind up with, Thanksgiving shows up in there or something like that. So we couldn't even get that to work. So you're right, it would be, it would be kind of every third Thursday, but not even actually every third Thursday when you go through
You
there.
have to really carefully look at the calendar,
Yeah.
every month and figure out,
Yep.
I do feel like the half day really is gonna be difficult for families. Even under best circumstances, when people have vacation time that they can take,
Mm-hmm.
like our snow days are a perfect example, of course, those are unplanned, but it's really a tough thing to have that happen multiple times. And employers became less supportive over time.
Yeah.
And if we build it into twice a month, I think that's a pretty big ask for all of our parents. But I don't know. I guess I'd also be interested in seeing some data, some research on how many kids just skip the day if it's only a half day.
Ooh, I'll see if we can find that.
Because I question attendance. If a family's gonna go somewhere for a 3-day weekend and they can miss half a day, I think how many kids actually are gonna show
Sure.
up?
We might be able to get that from Cedar Rapids, because that's, they use that half-day model. They might be able to share some attendance stats with us. I'll see if they can.
And another thing I'll raise, just speaking for my own experience, when I attend professional development on a day when I'm also at work, it's very, very difficult to try and manage both. Now, granted, I don't get a half day off, but you're rushing to get there, And then it's like, think of all the things you didn't get done and you still gotta do. And when I have bulk day, that I go to a conference, it's a different level of attention. I'm speaking for my own self. I understand our teachers have indicated otherwise, but I do my work.
And I would say our teachers, just so you know, from that standpoint, I think that if you ask them, they would give you their responses. Thursday early outs are here, but the half and the full day were both kind of here. I think they wound up going with the half day just from the continuity standpoint of they're kind of used to now being together once a week. And I think they looked at it as every 6 weeks or every 3 weeks, and I think that may have tipped the scale for them. But those two were clearly up here compared to Thursdays down here. So I'm not sure that you'd find half days way out here and full days here. I think they were really a lot closer to each other.
And I will say, going with a full day schedule has its, cons as well, but in comparison, and I'd probably lean that direction, just, the discussion we've had here, would certainly be interested in hearing from the community too. I do think there's some opportunities for students if we go with the whole day
Ooh.
model, for the BASB programs to do some field trips, do some, some things in the community that that would not be possible if we're talking a
Sure.
half day. So also, I would hope that we could, potentially, I know with our budget, we are limited, but if we could come up with some grant funding or something to help those families that aren't already in BASP and don't have a plan for their kids, but want them to be supervised, that there could be some special programming that we could partner with the community with, to put on, not us, but our BASP providers or community providers to try and make it an educational day for our students, even if they're not in our buildings.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's one of the Chicago car show trip that we do. That's one of the challenges too. Kids have to weigh on taking a day off to go on this field trip, which everyone that goes on it enjoys it and gets a lot out of it. But they gotta take a day away and that. And if there was a planned day, and it happened to fall in the 13 days of the car show, that would be great. And on that grant, Ann, who do we have that works at? Can you familiarize us just on how the whole grant process goes? I mean, is it something that you identify and tell staff to go after? Or are they, casting a wide net, just looking at all what's out there?
We don't have anyone that does grants. Usually what happens is grants are brought to us, the AEA, sometimes the state. Shares that information out and says this grant is available. We'll often partner with somebody who does grant writing, frequently from the AEA. We don't have a grant writer on staff. And so we'll reach out to them and they'll help us. If you've ever been through it, grant writing is its own art and science. And so they've got people up there that do that. So when the grant is identified, and a lot of times what the AEA will do is they'll look at the grant when it comes in and says that grant is designed for a school district or a school that fits this profile. They'll look throughout the districts and the schools in the AEA and say, oh, your school fits this grant profile. Would you be interested in applying? And if so, we'll help you write the grant. Kind of you gather the data, we'll help you format it type of thing. So that's usually the way that those work.
So is this something we could ask the AEA to help
Sure.
us explore and everything?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think there's community organizations too. From sitting on the youth development, what's it called? JJYD, Juvenile Justice Youth Development. That's county funded. They put out, they have funding, and so these organizations in the community come up, and they might, come up with programs that they would then seek funding from the county for. Same with the empowerment funding in the county. If we put this opportunity out there, I think we might be surprised how many community organizations would step up and say, hey, we would love to develop something for students.
And they might be more inclined to do that with a full day option
Oh,
than a half day.
absolutely, yeah, half day,
Yeah.
that's really hard, transportation and all that.
Mhm.
yeah, I think that would work the full day.
So let me see what I can do about, in particular, reaching out to Cedar Rapids, but then I think I'll reach out through the rest of the state. We didn't spend a lot of time, just because we weren't sure where you wanted to go with it, reaching out to other districts across the state who may have switched to half-days. Let me see what I can do about gathering some attendance data from them. I think that'd be really good to bring back, and I'll as soon as I can get that, I'll just put that together and send that out to you in an email, so you have that.
That's great, and then, this would go to the calendar committee for them to take on this.
Yeah, if you have a direction that you would like,
Full day.
okay. What I'll do is, and I know we've got a limited time frame between now and the end of the year, but I'll try to get the calendar committee together between now and the end of the school year here, just to make sure that there aren't any big rocks that we've missed in the conversation with the association that the calendar committee might have input on. And if there are, I'll get those back to you, and if not, put the task to them to start developing that rolling 3-year list, so you can see what that might look like over the course of the next 3 years. Very good.
Next topic is alternative committee regular meeting schedule. And there's looks like a proposal around the second Tuesday, fourth Tuesday, and how to kind of use those 2 days to work in the various committee activity that we have. For most, not all special committees, but for our standing committees. I know there's a little bit of discussion at the Ed committee earlier this week around for licensing in schools and that. I think this proposal was doing things here at ESC, correct?
Right.
Because it's sort of before or after regular work meetings. So that's the only comment I think that I've heard that. But I think generally trying to do these things and we can compress our work, be very focused on two days a month. I think from a scheduling standpoint, everyone's super busy, that's helpful. That's the only one. I think there's some ideas of being out of the school that feels good,
Mhm.
right? Be able to showcase, the principal gets to talk to us, we see staff, students potentially. So that's, I think, the only comment that's come up.
We're talking for, this to start the next school year or immediate?
I think
Okay.
this is for next year. I would,
Yeah.
So next.
Most of us have schedules set until the end of the fiscal year.
Yep.
So other than that, I think, yeah, that would be great.
And maybe one note on here, one of the things that, when we were talking about this, that we hadn't talked about was that showcase idea for our ed committee. And my only concern is, as we started talking about that and then looking at this, I thought that timing would be tight. So if we really want to reach out to staff and from a showcase standpoint, give them their due, if you will, make sure that they've got an appropriate amount of time to present, because there will still be things that you want to learn about that aren't the showcase events, and to make sure that we have enough time for you to do your ed committee work, but for them to have adequate time to present. I worry about this giving us enough time to do that, so I think the conversation on Tuesday was keeping that third Tuesday for ed committee and having a little bit of space in there to get both the showcase event and the issues of interest to the board, and having adequate time to do both.
Yeah, I think putting that committee locked in on with the board meeting and everything else, I don't know. The ed committee, it really needs to be in the buildings, and the conversation kind of is, with the staff and everything. There's real benefit from having that and getting out of it.
I think the other thing that Phil brought up Tuesday, which we haven't done at the ed committee meeting per se, it's happened sporadically, but I think would be a neat opportunity for us, is you brought up the intro that our
Right.
principals do at DPO.
Right.
When DPO is out there, and Phil had asked, is that something that we could transition into the ed committee? I think that'd be a great opportunity for the principal in the building, just to give you a quick overview of things that may be of specific interest that are happening in the building. Now you start adding that, plus you had a showcase event, plus there's an issue of interest that you as a board have brought up. We might need more than an hour to cover that. So.
Well, and every school has its own little unique feature that unless you're a parent of it or talk
Yep.
to a parent there, that you
Yeah.
don't get in on. the one thing too, with the discussion by our students and everything, operations needs to be meeting more often, I think, operations committee.
I think we,
Yeah.
and the history on that was, I think we decided that we were reluctant to have the committee meet without being a committee of the whole,
Well,
so
I understand.
we were just
But-
pushing all those things into the work session, is what we were
Okay,
doing.
well, and I know there's been discussions at different times of everybody being a member of every committee, and we just
Mhm.
have committee nights.
Yeah.
And do we just go through committee and do that?
Yeah,
So, finance is another one. Now, I've seen in the policies that are before the board, they're talking about the finance committee and everything. We really don't meet as a finance committee per se. And I think that that's important, that we have regular finance committee meetings. Before our district audit, we should definitely have one where the board sits down with staff and goes through and asks the questions and that, so we do a thorough review of the audit. And so, 2 or 3 finance committee meetings throughout the year, I don't think would be a bad idea to have scheduled, and it could something.
could
that
go in
fit-
where the ed committee
Exactly,
is,
that's
right
what I'm
there.
thinking. It could fit into
Yeah.
something along these lines,
Yeah.
so.
And operations could go where ed committee is too.
Right.
Yeah, either one of them.
Right.
And just-
Either one of them
And
could.
So it's a meeting of the whole, we're all there.
Could alternate.
Yeah.
And not every, and not every meeting are we gonna have a closed session, right? I mean,
No, no.
You just have that as a placeholder.
Yeah, we put that as a placeholder in there.
So, we could be
Mhm.
punching, putting those things in there, but,
What do you
I
think
know
about-
that discussion has come up, and sometimes if we were just to plan those Tuesdays heavy.
Yeah,
And so we all agreed to put our time into that, sometimes those extra times in.
what if we did an ops and a finance alternating in where that ed committee slot is right now? Then you'd have 6 finance committee meetings a year and 6 ops committee meetings a year.
That's plenty, yeah, that's great, I'm not gonna say it's too much, but, we
And
could,
and if we decide there's not enough agenda topics, we can,
Yeah.
not do it,
It's-
but we
it's-
have them slotted, so
it's a
that
short
they're
meeting.
scheduled and, yeah. Yeah. So ops and finance alternating on the second Tuesday, and then the fourth
We-
Tuesday would be reserved for P&G.
Right, and then the third
Third Tuesday.
Tuesday be our ed committee? So one of the things that Kim and I do as we roll into the end of the year here is we actually draft our calendar for next year and then get that out to you so that you have that. So if that sounds good to you, we'll put that schedule together for you and get that out for review.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So then, this last item is just, this is our running list of topics that we've raised for future work sessions. I'm not sure we need to really talk about that unless there's other agenda items that folks want to put on the table for consideration for future work sessions. We can use this as we're doing agenda setting at board meetings or upcoming work sessions, but, is there anything else that folks would want to put on this backlog of topics?
Not to think about a little bit longer, but it seems like if we move towards what we just talked about, right, having more frequent, finance and ops meetings, things like that, I think a lot of stuff that we were trying to cram into various work sessions will fit into those.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have to think about what stuff still belongs in different places.
No, so I think that's really fair.
Kim and I just try to keep a list of things that you've talked about that we haven't found on agenda items. And so these were just things that you brought up in the past that we hadn't seen calendared, and we just wanted to make sure that if there was still interest, that we didn't lose sight of those.
Well, I know we had the discussion at West High, I don't know if it was an ed committee or a work session, we're speaking of those, where we talked about aligning our career tech education and that it would be building block and that type of a thing. That's definitely, I think, a conversation.
And I think we talked about having an audit done at
Yes,
that meeting, where
right,
we had an
correct.
external group come in and review what our offer and teach requirements were and whether they were the ones that we wanted to keep.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, well, It is apprenticeships, and what we can do at the K-12 level is pre-apprenticeships,
Mhm.
and partnering with business and exposing our students to those career choices and those pathways, I think has to be very top of our list.
I think it's really timely too, because right now the Chamber and ICAD and ICR have a really strong push out in the business community to get about a tenfold increase in opportunities for students to do job shadowing, internships, and pre-apprenticeships. And so their big drive in the next calendar year, next school year, kind of the July to June one, is to really, they want to see a tenfold increase in opportunities. They've identified some gaps where kids want to do this, but there's nobody out there that has a spot for them, and so they're pushing really hard for that. The ICR just sent out their newsletter, and that was their big push at the top, was kind of we need communities, we need partners in the community to step up so that we actually have those opportunities for kids available. So
We're gonna lose businesses unless we provide replacement workers and people that are skilled for these things. We're gonna lose business. It's gonna drive our economy down, and we're not gonna have the sales tax revenue. It's a cyclical thing, and I think we have to pay attention to what others are doing and do it ourselves, and recognize that the pendulum has swung too far. And it's time to bring it back in at least bring it back in the middle, not have it on one side. So.
I'll just add to that with our previous discussion, with going with a full day off.
I just thought of that.
When we're
Some
really
great
supportive of
opportunities for kids.
To be able to, because I'm just thinking of my own, as a high schoolers, it's like I want them to have these experiences, but is it enough to miss a day of school?
The kids
Yeah.
don't want to miss a day of school. That's one of the things that we found from them, is they're really reluctant to be gone from school for an entire day. But if there were 5 days where they could do job shadowing or do some internship work and actually get out and see some of that in action, I mean, that could be a really high impact day for our high school kids.
So your question of things to add to the list, we had said that we were going to talk about sister schools and magnet schools. I don't know if that falls under the direction for district impact on facilities, or if we want to just be more specific. But we had said we weren't going to do that. I don't see that listed here.
I think we probably should be more specific, since you're right, we did say that we would take that topic up specifically with our community stakeholders, so.
I think we had some of under that facilities work, but I think that's a good idea. And find the time to get into that. I honestly think we should try to have a conversation in the work session before the end of the school year on that
Mhm.
topic. Maybe we can have that next week's agenda setting.
Yeah, we'll get that. We can put that on one of the drafts so that we've got that ready to go.
Yeah. That's good.
And then we didn't touch on it when we were talking mission and vision. I thought we might, but the question of the climate
Our work with UI.
curriculum and
Oh, yeah.
resolutions and that question that has been posed to us.
Mhm.
Yeah, well.
I think the community might like us to be a little
Oh,
more specific.
Sure,
Say we're
right.
just doing it.
Well, correct. Well, and that's what I was trying to get into, getting operations up and going, because that discussion is in there, but definitely as far as saying that, looking at, the climate question and solar and those types of things, expanding that discussion, definitely,
I know we've got that on an agenda coming up.
Correct.
So we have that aspect of it, the solar aspect.
But we don't have the resolutions. We can put that on, we'll get that on the next draft one too.
And just anticipating some of the feedback we'll get on the safety committee recommendations, there's likely have some closed session follow-up on that as well. I'm just guessing. Maybe some stuff there.
Sustainability, I think, is
Yeah,
what, is what you're.
I'll couch it under that, but then, so there's a thread running through there and connect all those pieces.
Do you have to add those to a running list?
Well, I actually, some of those, and correct me if I'm wrong here as I hear it, but we want to get those on work sessions before the end of the year, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually add those to draft work sessions that we have, that we're building right now.
Yeah, they would fit into some
Yeah,
of the committee things,
exactly.
but if we're not starting those committees
Right,
until.
rather than waiting until
Right.
fall, at least start that conversation now. Okay, all right, I
I think that's good.
thought that's what I heard. So those will be on our future work sessions between now and end of the school year.
Perfect. Okay, well, we've gotten to our agenda today. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
It feels like-
Thank you all.